Thank you so much. And I would like to start with a disclaimer. I'm a child of the 70s, and I'm currently no longer serving as DG, that is Jens Habermas. But what I'm talking today about, obviously, because it's been in my field of research as a social scientist for a couple of years, and then what I would call more the applied sciences in actually doing it and supporting with BBMRI for the last almost 20 years. So I did what many of us do in a first instance. I asked Dr. Google, what is a biobank? And this question, even when looking back at, also for me, for the last almost 20 years, it's not clear. It's not a clear answer. What is really a biobank? It depends very much on the context, whether it's disease-specific, population-based, and is it a nationally run biobank? Is it in a clinical setting? However, the definition that is here and up and about for a long time is that it is a collection of samples and associated data. So when you put biobank in Google, click on what images pop up, these are the images that you see. You see technologically advanced, nice colors, the image that everything works is technological. You see tissues, paraffin slides, rather the old school handwritten with a pencil codes up there. What is interesting in the depiction of what is biobanking, it's linked to the computer and the machine, so you have the sample and the data there, and you have an accurate representation. Biobanking is female, at least when it comes to those who work in the biobanks and do the work. A lot of biobank heads are male. Now, what is a biobank has also stuck with me in having troubles in explaining to my family members. I come from a farming environment. I'm the first academic, so what I do here today and at home is not considered work. And I tried for ages to explain, especially to my grandmother, because that's the golden standard. If you can explain what you do to your grandmother, you've done it. And I failed for years until I showed her the very last picture on the right. Oh, it looks like a brewery. If it looks like a brewery, it must be something similar to producing beer. I like beer, therefore I like biobanks. Keep on doing what you're doing. Now, when we put the biobanking into context, biobanking was around and about for a very long time as a practice. That is collecting samples and data, whatever that is, and for whatever purpose. Also in the medical setting, it gained importance in the 90s. In the 90s, I think it was 96 when for the first time the term biobank was used in a publication. Then around 2000 and onwards, a lot of national population-based or clinical biobanks were formed, prospectively or retrospectively. Around 2009, there was also the famous Time issue that depicted as number 8, I believe, biobanking is one of the most 10 important ideas, 10 ideas that are changing the world right now. My own organization came into this realm in 2006 when a research infrastructure for biobanks was put on the so-called S3 roadmap. That is one element where we as research community need an infrastructure for it. Another research infrastructure would be on clinical trials, ECRIN. 2008 to 2011, the EU funded a preparatory project that was already part of that. And eventually, in an interim phase, the member states took 3 years to agree on what is the model of financing that. The business model was already there. It was literally just what is the basis of calculating the membership fee. Eventually, in 2013, BBMRI was founded, and in between, the ideas of reforming the GDPR came into play, but actually, it only was reformed in 2018. And in currently also is the remodeling or the vision of creating a European health data space in the making, with the earliest possible date in 2025 to become a real thing. If it does, we will see. How it does, we will see. And all of you, I'm sure, have opinions about the GDPR. Now, another question I asked, this time Unplash, is what are images for ethics work? And this is what came up. What is interesting here is it's either an empty desk or it's, well, definitely very lonely work done by a middle-aged white man with a far too high coffee intake. Ethics, according to the European Union, is very much linked when it comes to research projects to the ethics appraisal process that all researchers have to go through when applying for a research project. And here considers ethics as a holistic idea of comprising of regulatory, legal compliance, as well as moral principles, fundamental rights and values, and how these apply to research activities. Now here's my cynical eye speaking. That is, who reads that? The sad reality in terms of the ethics self-assessment in research proposals is that very often this is done second to last when submitting a proposal. The last thing to date still remains gender. How many male and female work package leads do we have in this project? Now, in order to uplift the mood, here a story from the colleagues from the European Commission that assess those ethics self-assessments. Very often, similarly as we have heard on ethics committees, the questionnaire is filled out really, really badly. No surprise if it's done last minute. Now, this is not a singular case, happens quite frequently. The question is, do you deal with human research participants? And very often the answer is no. And one explanation was, well, it's not research participants, it's the employees of the clinical staff. So those are also human beings, and it was an honest mistake done in applying to it fast. What is interesting and what's good is, about it, if it's used as a tool, it helps to assess early on what are the ethical aspects that need to be tackled with. It is, of course, a bureaucratic tool, but it can also be used as something meaningful if it needs to be done. Because if we don't, we face the reality what we all do in our everyday work. How can we expect that research participants that we ask actually read and understand the informed consent when, honestly, who of us has spent the 76 working days to read the AGB of Amazon? I doubt that anyone of us did it. And in this context, also very often, especially when it's a lengthy informed consent, it's nothing what is done by any one of us. Now, I don't want to have this understood as an argument for or against consent. Far from it. However, to contextualize what is, that it should not become the con in consent. The question rather is, what are we protecting? And I call this the Nemo argument, but I want to start to answer that question with thinking also about the security aspects of protection. If you have a Japanese sliding door, don't bother to install a really expensive heavy lock. The question is really, what do you need to protect? What is the context of it? And in that sense, why Nemo argument, there's this dialogue between the forgetful fish called Dory and the father of Nemo. I don't want anything to happen to my child Nemo. Well, that's an odd request. Because if nothing is happening, nothing is happening. It doesn't move. Now, when we skip back again to the GDPR and its complexity also in consent, both as a legal requirement as well as an ethical requirement, we have a plethora of different requirements in Europe today. And this book I highly recommend because it shows the complexity of it and that national interpretations are not yet concluded. What it is that in the context we are operating in the society of today, we need to rethink privacy. Privacy concepts are certainly have been developed in the 19th century, and technological promises, well, they're already far ahead in the 22nd or even further. So in the same analogy as don't believe the worst case scenarios in the movies like Terminator, think of what is possible, desirable, wanted, needed today. And of course, when it comes to biobanking, the competition is between public biobanks that are based largely on solidarity, on altruism, versus direct-to-consumer services. Also in that sense, linking to a previous presentation of engagement, where the engagement we put in the publicly funded biobanks is also competing with the user experience of the direct-to-consumer services. And here, we need to communicate as well. We cannot compete with them. There are limits to what we can do, and that's okay. Then the assumption is very often that a patient is a singular, has a singular identity. You are just a patient. Similarly, as you are when you're a woman and deemed a mother, it puts everything on top. Everything else does seem to exist. You can't be a mother and a professional in certain settings. And there are multiple other explanations or examples. So the argument I want to make here is to understand that patients are not a homogeneous group, that citizens, patients, the publics, plural, need to be understood and assessed in the various settings. And as Virginie Bossuet from Eurordis so beautifully put forward, the level of concern, especially in terms of privacy, decreases with the level of the severity of disease. Here, a very brief overview, which I will test you about, of course, after the presentation, is a comparative table about the secondary use, consent for health research data, biobanks, and so on and so forth. It was executed in the context of the 1 Billion Genome Project. It does not dive into the further complexities of the elements, but it showcases there is no harmonization in Europe. Harmonization seemingly is a bad word, but nonetheless, it is something that we need to strive for. And it indicates that there are multiple facets of consent that we still have to talk about. What I want to stress with this slide is also to make the link to the European health data space, where there is a differentiation between primary and secondary use that has also an impact on biobanks. And here, the idea is that we can have a clear-cut line between clinical care and research. I argue I beg to differ. The same is also true that an LC expert exists. It would be, if possible, look like a jack of all trades, an egg-producing, wool-producing, milk-producing pig. If we would genetically modify it, it would rather look as this curious animal, which was voted the ugliest animal, I think, in 2001. I'm going to skip over a few slides here. You can have a look at them when the slides are shared. But I want to point out two more aspects. And that is, when it comes to risk assessment, think carefully, think about realistic risks with the precautionary principle in mind, rather than focusing on the worst-case scenarios. Be very clear on the goal, including the values, as we've heard in the morning, because only through that you can navigate through the system of what is embedded ethics here today. And with this, I hope we can start rethinking a biobank definition that is to think not of samples and data, but rather data and associated samples. And ultimately, trust comes in as a foundation. However, as we also have heard, trust comes in on foot and leaves on a rocket. And with this, I'm also leaving the stage because, trust me, I'm a doctor.